Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 2 in our beekeeping class. On the first lesson a couple of days ago, we reviewed basically all the equipment involved in keeping bees, the tools, the boxes, and also the honeybee biology, which is an important part of being a beekeeper. And this week, or today I should say, we will be looking at how you start. You know, first of all, to start, of course, you have to buy the equipment. You have to have that handy, ready to receive your bees. But once you've done that, how do you get bees? Where do you find bees? And how do you install them in your hives? And I've also got a section on regulations. This is a bit dry. It's hard to make regulations exciting. The regulations are, I'm not going to get into fine details. I'm giving you links to where you can get all the details, but I'm kind of covering the general, the main issues you should be aware of. And beyond that, you get into finer issues that probably don't relate too much to a new beekeeper, but you can do your digging yourself if you care to do that. And then finally, we'll look at a bit of health and safety. You're working with livestock, you're working with equipment, and there's a few things to keep in mind just so that you don't go out of business within 1 year because you've hurt yourself. So let's get on with it. Hey. Oops, I don't want to start the music again. Here we go. So the first thing you need to do before you even buy your equipment is think, okay, where am I going to put these hives? Where you put your hives will have a big impact on how easy it will be for you to work with your bees on a day-to-day basis, but also, how enthusiastic you'll be to go to your hives. If they're far away or they're in a remote location, they're hard to get to versus just in your backyard. So we'll go over some of these elements here in the next few minutes. And as always, please do interrupt me. Please, ask questions. This is a picture of my bee yard. You see the little white boxes over there. I've got 7 hives. So this one right over here is the swarm I caught in the middle of September. This is probably taken shortly after I caught that swarm. So it's important. These are some of the criteria you should think about when you're looking for a place to put your hives. It should be comfortable for you, both you and the bees, of course. The bees need to be not distracted, not disturbed, so that they can do their work. And you, because the more comfortable you are, the more pleasure you'll have in beekeeping. When I tell my children, before they start a job, a big piece of homework or a project, I always tell them the first thing you should focus on is making sure your work environment is very comfortable. And after that, the job will be easier. You also want to be reducing the barriers to action. And as I said a couple of seconds ago, if your hive is hard to get to, it's a lot of work to get to, you'll be less likely to enjoy going there. It should be safe for you, your bees, and of course, your neighbors. So let's go over some of these thoughts. Accessibility. Here we have a picture of a beehive on a rooftop. Probably if that woman there who's keeping the bees, if she works nearby in that building, it's very accessible. It's very practical. When I worked in an office setting once, I tried to convince my boss to let me keep a beehive on the roof, but it was a bit too outside his comfort level to allow me to do that. It would have been very practical. I could have gone to see the bees during my coffee break or whatever. Very nice. So here, this woman has beehives on a roof of an office tower, very accessible. But on the other hand, you have to be moving heavy equipment in and out. So sometimes a rooftop can be a bit of a problem. How do you get all those boxes down to your extracting equipment? Do you have to carry them through an elevator with other people in it and a few little stray bees flying around? These are some of the issues you have to think about. You'll be visiting your hives frequently, and you'll be moving heavy honey supers. So these are some of the issues that relate to what is accessible.
How heavy are we talking here?
A deep super full of honey could be 36 kilograms, or that's like 75 pounds or something more. Very heavy. It's very heavy. It's not pleasant to move. We'll talk about that shortly. It's great if you can drive right up to your hives. You'll be taking the honey supers off. You'll be bringing them to where you'll be extracting them, either yourself or at a friend's place or something, and you'll be transporting them. So the easier you can access them, the better. These pictures on the left, where these are major commercial operations, pollination operations, and of course they have all the heavy equipment. On the right is probably a hobby beekeeper who, who's probably not making much money if he's buying these vehicles just to to work with his 2 or 3 hives, but he's having, or she is having, a lot of fun, which is a big part of the equation here. And this is what I use, a fancy technology here that's been around for thousands of years. I can drive my car to within about 50 meters of my hive. So I just have a wheelbarrow nearby. And, when it's time to move the heavy honey supers or heavy equipment, that's what I use. Your hives need to be accessible to you as a beekeeper. You should be able to move around the hives, access them from the front, maybe the back or either side. The more points of access your hive you have to your hive, the better it is. You never know, the wind's blowing, the sun's in your eyes. It's better to move on to one side or the other. Or maybe you're left-handed or right-handed. Who knows what? I find that it's good to have be able to move all around each hive. It's preferable, not absolutely necessary, but preferable. So we have here a picture on the left. We have the beekeeper has installed a makeshift hive stand here. He seems to have some bricks, some cinder blocks on which he put some wood and on which he's put then his hives. His hives are separated by what looks like at least a meter. So as he's taking off equipment, he can just deposit it right there. That's very handy. He deposits it on a nice, dry, level piece of wood as opposed to the ground, which sometimes, could be a bit of a problem if there's lots of grass. Here on the right, we've got a very, I think, A-type personality beekeeper, very well organized. He's got the, he's put down what looks like roofing tiles in front of his hives. That's great to keep the grass under control. It's nice, you want to do that. And this person here on the left, the grass is still growing to keep that under control. But I find these hives are too close together. It'd be, look, trying to get to this hive, you actually have to come at it from the front, which sometimes it disturbs the bees because that's where their entrance is. Or the back, which it can be hard if you're lifting things from the back and not the side. Whereas it's well organized and whatnot, I find this one a bit too tight for comfort. Also, once you find your spot, maybe you're really going to like beekeeping. So you might think, well, make sure I have room for 6 or 8 or 10 more hives around here and not just one, something to consider. So if you're keeping it in your front porch, that might be a problem. Level ground is handy if you're using wheelbarrow or vehicle, walking to your hives. The picture I found on the left, these are all pictures I've lifted off the internet, looking around for pictures that illustrate some of the points I like to make. And I found this picture on the left. These are hives that are they're basically fixed to cliff faces. This is in China. So I suppose I'm thinking they didn't have much available level ground, or perhaps the level ground, maybe were at risk of vandals or cattle or something. So they fixed them along the side of a cliff, and they're using ropes. I think this is the kind of situation where you'll probably not be enticed to go visit them on a regular basis, your bees, if you have to suit up. I mean, if you have to get mountain climbing equipment on, and I don't know how well you can do that with your bee suit as well. In terms of accessibility, you want to make sure there's no rocks, obstacles over which you can trip or bang your head. I've banged my head a few times recently in my hive, and I did actually, this is not my picture, but something very similar. I cut some branches. You're carrying it, don't forget, you might be carrying some equipment, heavy or less heavy. You might be working there for an hour. It might be hot, you're sweating, you've got your hood on, and you're a bit tired. You might be frustrated because perhaps you've been stung. And then so you can easily, in those conditions, trip on a root and fall, and it's just you have to be careful about it. And here in Canada, one concern we might have are bears. Following the Facebook discussions on the beekeepers of Eastern Ontario and Western Quebec, you occasionally get a comment from someone: the bears got into my hives, what should I do? In this case here, first of all, if you can find a place where there are no bears or few bears, great. Otherwise, if bears are regular visitors in your area, this person here has put an electric fence. That's usually what you do. Electric fences are fairly cheap, and they usually do a good job in keeping the bears away. I'm lucky. I mean, I'm in semi-wilderness, and I've seen bears in general area there before, but so far, so good. I don't have an electric fence.
Mark?
Yes?
What about raccoons?
Yes, we'll talk about that as well in a future slide. But raccoons are pests, of course, and raccoons, skunks may come to your hive and scratch around at the entrance and eat up bees that come in and are out, but they can't knock it over. They shouldn't be able to knock over your hive, and it shouldn't be that strong. But you got to be careful though. Who knows? Those raccoons are wily, aren't they? So, it may look like a nice spot, but if you get a bit too much rain, it might flood. Or even if it doesn't flood, humid areas are full of mosquitoes. It might get muddy after a few days of rain, and so try to avoid that. But also be sure, because your bees need to drink water. They do also take up water, so be sure they have access to water. In Canada, it's pretty rare that you're located in an area where there's no open water fairly nearby. It could be just little creeks or ponds, puddles. But failing that, provide them with some water. Go ahead.
How close should, like, I have a river fairly close to the house, like, but maybe like 500 meters away. Is that okay? That
should be fine. The bees will find that. The thing is, one of the complaints you get from neighbors is that the bees get into the pool, right? Because they're looking for water. So as if you provide them with more readily accessible water, then they'll be less likely to do that. How do you orient your hives? Does it matter? Well, and generally speaking, where you put them, orientation, place them where there's no lot of people walking around, bicycles and vehicles. Try to avoid commercial agriculture. In this case, that's not happened, right? You have a huge, we have a lavender field and a beautiful sunflower field. There is always a risk of accidental poisoning when the farmer might be applying some pesticides. In the rules for application of pesticides, when a farmer buys a pesticide, there are application rules, and I'm not a farmer, but I do suspect that they receive a bit of training on that. It does indicate how to avoid poisoning bees. Do not apply it on windy days. Do not apply it when they're full flower and the bees are visiting the flowers. So if the farmers respect those rules, generally speaking, you could get away with it, but sometimes people cut corners and whatnot, and poisoning from pesticide does happen. It gets reported. So try, if it's possible, to avoid that. I know it's not easy because farming is all over the place. And also, don't put them in a pasture, because you might have a cow come along and use it as a scratching post, and that's not much better than a bear.
Mark, I'm just about in the cities. The regulations are relatively good now. There's not a lot of pesticides in the city. Are there
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have your landowners who might spray for dandelions or whatever, and it's always an issue. But in the city, what happens is it's small scale, right? You don't have like 500 hectares being sprayed at one time, exactly where all the bees are that day, with that huge cloud of pesticide moving over your hives. So in the city, typically it's the person who will spray their lawn. It's a tiny piece of land compared to where the bees are foraging. They're foraging over a huge area, so it's less of a concern, I would say. So also you want to have your hive entrances facing towards the sun, southeast, southwest, south, so that they start earlier in the day, they work later in the afternoon, in the evening. It makes a real difference. And you want to protect your hives from the north wind. When it's, we've had a very mild winter so far here, but when it's -20 and the wind is howling from the north, so try to put them, with either a natural or an artificial windbreak, so that little extra bit of keeping the wind, most of the wind off of them will help them, just increase the chances that they'll have a good overwintering success. Again, these are my hives, and I've got these trees here just on the north side of my hives, so that helps. So, assuming, you have the freedom to put your hives anywhere you want, which is very rarely the case, it's great to put them in an environment that's rich in nectar and pollen, and the nectar flow starts early and ends late. Ideally, there's nectar flowing from the beginning of May to the end of September, huge amounts. But, that's one of the advantages in agricultural areas. You might have a lot of nectar, huge nectar flows. The bees, they have all the nectar they want for, an extended period of time. You think about clover honey, alfalfa honey. Those are, honeys from huge alfalfa fields out west in Alberta, Saskatchewan. The bees produce a lot of honey there. This is a picture where my hives are at. So as you see, there's hardly any open field at all. It's very tiny percentage. It's mostly forest and lakes. But they, you know, I managed to get 30 to 35 kilos of honey a hive. It's mostly in my area, goldenrod, I think, and the basswood I was saying. Bees will forage on average up to 5 kilometers from their hives. It may be further away, but you know, the further it is, the less, you know, they really have to be desperate to start flying that far. And so they'll look around, and if they find something. This is something I don't get into my class. You know, the waggle dance, how bees communicate to each other. Where have they found nectar? These are things you can look for in your spare time. It's all very fascinating.
I was planning on putting my hives, they'll face southeast and be in sun half day. And then as the sun starts going over the trees, they'll start getting shade. Is that okay? So it'll be about half day sun and then half day.
That's fine. I think it's better to get them going with sun in the morning, or, you know, that's the best thing to wake them up. It's a bit of a wake up call when the sun's shining into their.
The sun gets so hot.
It does, yeah. You saw my hives. Some of my hives get some shade in the midday, and some of them less so, or we'll get it later. But you know, I don't think it's a big deal. Some of the things you could do if your hive's on a very hot spot, there's not much shade, and it's a hot day with full sun. You can open them up. You take one of the boxes and just shift them a bit, so there's a space, like a 1 centimeter space, so there's more air circulation. Because the bees will engage in behavior designed to cool the hive down on those hot days. We'll talk about that later. So you want to find a place for your hives. What are the regulations for hive location? Basically, you know, it gets into a bit more detail than that, but just to, you know, roughly speaking, if you shouldn't be placing your hives within 30 meters of a property line separating the land on which the hives are placed. So again, that makes it hard for city beekeeping unless you have a massively large piece of land in the city. And as we discussed the last lesson, in Ontario, or generally speaking, you know, no one's going to give you a hard time if you keep a hive in the city, as long as as long as people don't complain, right? It's not as if they're out there searching for hives in the city. So that's up to you to figure out. Is there anything else to say about that? I don't think so. Yeah, even hives with or without bees shouldn't be located within 10 meters of a highway. So, you know, that makes sense. So a highway, I suppose, defined in Ontario probably means, you know, provincial or regional roads. In Quebec, you know, the rules are generally the same kind of thing. Keep them away from property boundaries, keep them away from roads and buildings, you know. So Quebec has the same kind of thing. The numbers may be a bit different, but there you go. There's a website here if you want to get further details on that. And this is British Columbia now. Whereas in Quebec and Ontario, it's defined by the province, the distances, the setbacks. In British Columbia, it appears to be defined by the municipality. I mentioned Columbia because one of you is in Revelstoke, right? Who's in Revelstoke?
I am.
Emily. Hi, Emily. How are you doing out there?
Good, good.
Great, good. So you'll have to check with your municipal government on what they expect. But it looks like through the window, you're probably in a rural area there, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you may not have to worry about that. That's great. So what happens if you don't have a rural property? As I said, you can either, you know, kind of sneak a hive in the city. You can network among family, friends, and colleagues to identify someone who's got a suitable property. You know, you could someone you know, or just you can go knock on the door of someone who's got a large property and say, listen, I'll give you some honey. Can I put some hives in the back? It's up to you to network to see what you can do. Or that old cocktail party situation, you can ask, you know, people around every time you talk about your bees. Okay, now you've figured out where to put your hives. That's where you got the equipment. You know about honeybee biology, and you know where you should be putting your hives. So how do you get bees? You know, that's often a question people ask me. Where do you get bees? Where do you find them? And there's different ways. There's probably one common way, more common way. There's different ways. The most exciting thing to do is to catch a swarm. And while these pictures are not mine, again, I stole them off the internet. This is exactly this setup I was in last September when I caught a swarm. I had them in a low-lying branch, very practical, very easy. Then I just put them in a bucket, just like this person's doing. And once they're in the bucket, I emptied them into an empty hive that was full of frames that already had drawn combs. So the bees like that. One thing that surprised me, I was holding the bucket just like this person's doing with the left hand and shaking the branch, and they all fell in the bucket, and it was a lot heavier than I anticipated. So I almost dropped the bucket. You don't realize it. You think a little bee is it's weightless, right? It's a little bee weightless, but when you have like 10 or 15,000 of them, and there's a 2 or 3 kilos, it's like dropping like the equivalent of maybe one of those bags of milk there in the bucket, or 1 or 2 of those, right? So it was a bit heavy. So what's the advantage of catching a swarm? It's free. You have several thousand bees and a mated queen, because the queen who flies with the swarm is the original queen that was in the original hive. So she's already mated, so it's great. However, you're getting just a bunch of bees. You're not getting any eggs, larvae, honey, pollen. So these bees, when you put them in their hive, they're gonna have to start from scratch. Also, you could be waiting a long time to catch a swarm. It's not really a good strategy to say, I'm starting beekeeping this year and I'll just wait around to see if any swarms are around. Someone contacts me, you might be waiting weeks, right? So it's not a good strategy. Usually it's...
Oh, sorry. Mark, I just question about that. When you're getting a swarm like that, they just plop into the bucket like it's like a mass, so they stay glued together and just fall in?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really amazing. And when I was first getting into this too, I was also thinking, what if I shake that tree? They're all gonna fly away. Yeah. But they don't. They just stay together. The queen's in there and they just stay together. There's some type of instinct there. Stay together, stay with the queen, just hang in there. And they just fall right into the bucket and stay in the bucket. Kind of neat, no?
That's so weird.
It is weird. I have a little video here showing just that. I discovered this the other day, and I was looking for short videos. That's my criteria when I put a video in this course. It's got to be short, 1 or 2 minutes, and it's got to be good. And I thought this was good. This is a woman. She's in Oregon, I think. And look at the way she's dressed. Oh my God, you think she's going to get stung? And I call her the elegant swarm catcher. So watch this. Can you hear?
My goal is to get the swarm to fall into this nuke box. And
so I'll stop it. First of all, can you hear her talking? Hello?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can hear her. Okay.
Yes. If you could turn it up a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think the volume might be better on your end. I don't think I can control your volume, but you can try that. And so look at the swarm. It's not a huge swarm, but it's a nice swarm sitting right there in a branch at arm's length. Fantastic. So let's just watch her do this.
hopefully the queen will land in there. And if she does, the rest of the swarm will follow suit. How sturdy this thing is. You think it'll hold up?
Well, that's kind of flimsy, isn't it?
I like that. She asked the camera woman, her friend, you want to hold that? She says, I don't know. It looks pretty flimsy. I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
I don't want them to fall so far.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
So
You
here,
probably want to use something
if I can
that's
do
a
this.
little... Yeah, careful about standing on that thing. I don't
But
know.
it'll brace my weight
Okay,
when they fall in.
okay.
Okay.
Oh my God.
There we go. Get this centered.
It's going to be you next year.
There we have it. I think she's in there. Oh, I think I see her. Perfect. And not a sting.
That's fantastic. No, I love this video. So that's great beekeeping equipment there. And I like that dress. Nice dress for beekeeping. Okay, now I got to figure out how to move along here. Oops, there we go. So that's catching a swarm. You saw how easy it is. And bees, when they're swarming, they tend to be not very aggressive at all. I mentioned that last week, a few days ago. So she clearly knows what she's doing and was not afraid at all of getting stung. You might get stung, but usually you don't have to worry about it. So another way of getting your bees is to buy an existing colony. So I show a picture of two existing colonies, right? One that looks very clean and well organized. The other one looks a bit long in the tooth. So what are the advantages of an existing colony? Well, you have an instant hive. You have bees, queens, you have frames, you have drawn comb, hive bodies, the boxes, eggs, larvae. I mean, there it's an operating, it's a, what's it called? It's a, I forget what the accounting term is when something's working. It's an ongoing operation. So that's good. But it's best to get advice from an experienced beekeeper before you go out and buy somebody's hive. I guess before I go into that, I'll say in this picture, there's you might have the person on the right that's willing to sell you his hive or her hive. It may be diseased. You never know what you got there. So you have to make sure that it's a healthy hive. And to sell hives, you need to have a permit. So if you're going to be buying a hive from someone, you have to ask for the permit. And that means that to get a permit, the provincial apiarist has to come and inspect it to make sure they're healthy. So that's a guarantee that you're buying a healthy hive. How much does it cost? I don't know. It all depends on, probably the hive on the right is not very expensive, whereas the one on the left is more expensive. And then what most people do, the vast majority of people do, is to order a nuke, which stands for a nucleus. A nucleus is like a mini hive. It comes in a small little box like that. These boxes, they could be different. They could be wood. They could be, looks like some type of corrugated plastic here. But anyway, something along that shape, in which there are 4 or 5 frames. When I buy my nukes, I've always got the 4 frames of them. So 5 is a better deal. What you get usually are frames of drawn comb. Inside there's honey and pollen already. There could be several thousand bees, 3, 4, 5,000 bees in there. You have a mated queen, you have eggs, larvae, caparoons. So it's like buying a regular hive, but a mini hive, right? And these days, these go for about $250. So 5 frames with a ready to go queen and bees and pollen and honey for $250. Go ahead.
Mark, sorry, I have a question. Who gives the permits for selling the bees, and how do you know if they're healthy?
Well, if there's a permit, they should be healthy. So the permit is given by the provincial apiarist in Ontario. And in Quebec, I'm not less familiar with the situation in Quebec, but I suspect it would be the same kind of thing. And in BC, I think you call them the chief veterinary or something like that, where they would do this kind of thing. The whole idea is you don't want to spread disease. They're particularly looking for 2 types of disease. Well, in Ontario right now, they're worried about this, in Quebec, the small hive beetle, and then also American fall brood. They want to make sure you're not spreading that. So that's what you do. But when you buy nukes, they should be inspected as well. People who sell nukes, they should be getting the provincial apiarist stamp of approval. You can always buy a nuke from a friend down the road or whatever, but you do that at your own risk.
All right, thank you.
I'm thinking of selling a couple of nukes in the spring. I'm not sure yet, because what happens is in the spring and the early summer, your bees are starting. They make a lot of bees, and they have a tendency to swarm. And if you take some frames out of each hive, you're going to reduce that tendency to swarm. But what do you do with these frames? Typically, you start another hive. But if you have enough hives, you don't want to start another hive. So maybe you want to sell those, right? So I'm looking into that myself as a new direction. So you pre-order nuke. What you do is you get your nuke like this. This one's in a cardboard box, and this person puts them in a new hive boxes here with frames that are bare, right? He's starting from scratch. This person's starting from scratch with bare frames. There you go. They were just dropped in. I have another quick video here of some guy doing the same thing. So it's always nice to see someone actually in action here. So let's do that. I think he's from the South somewhere. You'll hear his accent.
Hi, this is Roy. Today we're going to show you how to install your nuke that you just got from us. So make sure that you have your equipment set up where you want it to be placed. Here we have 5 frames in the box on our bottom board. And then we also have our top cover that we're going to be placing on our equipment. And make sure you have your suit on, all zipped up, your gloves, and your smoker going. So we're going to open up our nuke first. And we're first going to want to take out the edge frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this right in the box and remove a couple frames so that we have a little extra room to work with, and then put them right on in.
Well, that's kind of neat. I just want to say, look at all those bees hanging out the bottom of the frame there, right? The bees tend to want to stay together. They don't just fly away, which is something you fear they're going to do all the time.
Then we're going to put our 2 extra frames over here. Make sure all of them sitting down nice and flat. Squeeze them together so that you don't get fur comb. And then put your lid right on. And then you can do a little circle action to squeeze the bees out of the way. And then you're going to take that feeder and you're going to fill it up with some sugar and some water. We like to do 1 to 1, so fill up the sugar to here. And then fill the rest up to water, shake it good, and then screw the cap right on, and then you can put that right in the front. And that'll provide the bees enough food for them to start drawing out that comb. And next time you go through to inspect them, if they've drawn all 10 frames out, then you want to put your second box on. So there you have it.
Well, that was interesting.
Hi, this is Roy.
When I see that, that's exactly what you need to do. They're putting the bees on in only 1 box to start with. You can do that, only 1 box, right? Because there's just 4 frames of bees and they have to draw the comb and all the other frames. That takes a lot of work for the bees, so they're just starting out. But she says as soon as you see the frames full of comb, then you should put up another box as soon as possible. You see her feeding them a bit of sugar water. That's something you can do in the spring, although if there's a lot of nectar out there already, it may not be absolutely necessary, I would say. So there you go. Any questions on that video?
So far, so good.
Right. Okay, good.
What is the ratio of water and sugar?
That's a good question. It's something I haven't yet been able to understand the logic. Some people will say 2 water to 1 sugar in the spring, or 1 water to 1 sugar in the fall, or just 1 water to 1 sugar all the time. I'm getting different recommendations. At the end of the day, the bees take this and they transform it into, in the spring, they transform that into wax, because if you want them to build wax, if it's bare comb, or in the spring after the long winter, they may not have any honey left, so you're just feeding them. And so it seems to me it should be the more concentrated, the better, 1 to 1, right? But I don't know. I think you have to do your own research on that. You get different opinions all the time. I always feed them as concentrated as possible. If it's for food.
Why do people use sugar and not just honey?
Well, that's a good question. Sugar is cheaper than honey, and that's what the bees like sugar. I mean, the nectar that they go get in the flowers is basically sugar. Essentially, it's what they're after. So it's not at all a bad thing for the bees to be feeding them sugar. It's what they're looking for. Honey is more expensive. So if you want to feed, what do you have a jar of honey, you can sell it to your neighbor for $20, or for $20 you could buy, sometimes for good deals you can buy 20 kilos of sugar, right? So that goes a lot further to feed your bees than 1 kilo of honey.
Or you could just leave your the rest of your fruits, like the peels of your fruits, around.
That's less. Bees will not necessarily go for that. You'll end up attracting wasps.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't start leaving fruit waste around the hives. That won't be good.
So that relates to a question I was just about to ask: is what type of sugar would you prefer? Would that be sucrose, dextrose, or fructose, or lots of different classes?
In the recent Ontario Bee Journal, it's a publication that comes out every 3 months, there was a big article on what to feed your bees, and basically table sugar was the best thing. There might be marginal benefits for other more hard to find other types of sugars, but frankly, guys, table sugar is the best. If you feed them honey too, depends. In the fall, you want your hives to go into the winter full of honey, and if there's still room in some of those frames, and some people, if you feed them honey, that's a good thing as well. It won't hurt them. But some people will say honey is harder for them to digest than just sugar. You know, so, and then they may have more of a need to go out on cleansing flights in the winter. They may need to vacate their bowels, empty their bowels, and if you're feeding them honey, depending on the kind of honey as well. So again, feeding them sugar water appears to be the best approach. So I'm just trying to move on to the next slide here, but I don't think I got it. I don't know what to do here. Hold on. I guess I need to go to the end of this. Here, bear with me here. Maybe if I go, there we go. So, okay, more on the regulatory framework. I'm so sorry. You must register annually with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs in Ontario. You register your hives. You tell them this year I have so many hives. Just send them a piece of paper. I think you can just email it in or something like that. They want to know who has hives and where they are, because they can send their apiary inspector out to make sure your hives are well managed. Because there are diseases out there, and if they're not controlled, it could cause a problem for other beekeepers, you know, because bees do get around. The apiary inspector can inspect all honeybee colonies by instruction from the provincial apiarist. So the person in charge in Toronto, or I think they're in Guelph, might say, okay, I've got bad news. I'm hearing some stuff from this guy's bee yard. Go have a look. So you might have someone knocking on your door to check out your hives. Or you, as a beekeeper, might ask the apiarist to come along and give you some advice or answer questions. So that's what they're there for. But also the apiary inspector, him or herself, may be doing the rounds and just checking things out. In Ontario, you need a permit to sell bees or used equipment. You don't need a permit to sell new equipment, but used equipment, yes, because used equipment could be infected with the spores of American foul brood, which is a bad disease. You don't want to spread that. It's not very common, but if you get it, it's not good. You need permits to export bees and go for pollination, but I haven't mentioned all those details because I think it just will be too long and it's not really pertinent for first-year beekeepers. Other requirements in Ontario, you have to report any incidents of American foul brood and the small hive beetle. American foul brood is a bad thing. You don't want that. The small hive beetle is just a bother. It's just a pest and you can live with it and deal with it, but it's new. It's just arrived in Ontario recently and it's spreading and it will spread, and there's probably all we can do about that is slow it down. But c'est la vie when you live in a globalized world. So, and if you have dead colonies or used equipment you're not working, you can't be leaving them around, okay? They have to be, you have to get rid of them. And you have to post a sign with your name and your address in each of one of your bee yards. That's the same thing in British Columbia and the same thing in Quebec. So, you know, if someone comes along and sees a bee yard, they should be able to say, hey, whose bee yard is this and where do they live? So Quebec, the obligations for also annual registration, maintain a register, what you have, what you sold, and where you're moving your bees to. Again, put your name, and there's a website here you can find more information.
If we're trying to do this in the city and we're not at the right distance, but we've got an agreement with our neighbor, how do you register a beehive that technically is too close to the property line and still be allowed to?
Well, I mean, there's different ways of dealing with that, right? I'll leave it up to your imagination.
People just don't stay put, don't specify exactly where it is and you still register, or
you just give an address, you know, I don't think no one's going to know how big your property is or whatever. So that,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. In British Columbia, similar obligations. Registration, maintaining the register, name and so your name and the address. In British Columbia, here's a website for more information. Okay, that's it for regulatory framework. I hope you know you're going to be able to sleep tonight. It was so exciting. The next part is your health. I think it's worthwhile. It's a five-hour beekeeping course, but it's worthwhile spending a few minutes on just being, you know, keeping yourself in good shape. Because this first slide here of someone with a sore back is the classic complaint of the beekeeper. You know, I hurt my back, right? You're moving heavy stuff. Here we are, a full deep super of honey. That's what every beekeeper dreams of, a full deep super of honey. Is heavy. It's the equivalent of 9 times 4-liter bags of milk. So, you know, that gets heavy, or 2.5 cases of 24 beers. The picture in the middle shows this poor guy holding this. It's a medium super, and I think that's just like maybe around 20 kilos, and he's not holding it right. You know, we all know you're supposed to bend your knees and whatnot when you're holding these heavy things, so keep that in mind. As much as possible, get these little contraptions, these what do you call them, trolleys or whatever, to move your stuff around. Try not to be walking around with these heavy things too far, too much. There are strategies to avoid even having to do that. What I do is I bring my wheelbarrow next to my hives, and inside my wheelbarrow I have an empty box, and instead of carrying a full box, I just remove the frames one after the other into the empty box. So I really never have to carry a full frame. And then I bring this to my wheelbarrow to the car, and I can repeat the exercise there, or I can just, you know, tough it and just do one lift of the heavy box. So to reduce the total amount of lifting you have to do. So strategies for sparing your back, you know, you can use medium supers. You know, the deep supers are good for the brood chambers. Here's 2 brood chambers, and you can see here. You know, anybody knows what that little piece is in the middle there between the medium and the deep?
Queen excluder.
Very good. I'm very proud of you. Very proud of you. So, and then above that, you might want to just carry your honey, get your honey in medium supers so they're not so heavy. The disadvantage of a medium supers is instead of extracting, you know, basically you have as much honey in a deep super as you have in 2 mediums. So if you have 2 mediums instead of a deep, you have to uncap the frame. We'll see this later. Uncap the cells over 20 frames instead of 10, and extract 20 frames instead of 10. It's more work during extraction, but it's less heavy. Other strategies: do not move full supers if possible. Remove and transfer the frames one at a time, as I was telling you a few minutes ago. Have a big, strong helper on hand. So I don't know, maybe some of you have a teenage son who's a big football player or something, or a husband, or maybe yourself are doing weightlifting, who knows what. It helps. Any questions on that? Going back to keeping your yard clear and clean.
I already told my husband he has to help me sometimes.
Very good, very
I'll
good.
get him a
Buy him some weightlifting equipment so you can practice over the winter. Keep your bee yard clean so that you're not tripping over things while you're carrying these heavy boxes. If you're working alone, have a cell phone, you know, whatever, you have a heart attack or something like that. Oh, avoid starting fires. Be very watchful of your smoker. A couple summers ago, I started a fire. It was a very small fire. I mean, just a couple of blades of grass were burning around my smoker. I was surprised. You know, I just stamped it out with my foot, not a problem. But you could imagine these things getting out of control. And I looked around. It didn't take me long to find this on the news items. I just searched in Google News for beekeepers, fire, or whatever, and I came up with this article. So, you know, you're using your smoker. Your smoker gets pretty hot. If you're working, you're sweating, you're lifting heavy things, you're checking your bees, you're smoking, you put your smoker down in the dry grass, and you disregard it for a few minutes. And next thing you know, there's, a grass fire happening next to you. So be careful about that. Of course, we all worry about bee stings. From what I'm reading, it's worth reading up on this. And I've got here one link to a website, but look around. First of all, try to avoid it. It's not much fun getting stung by a bee, but getting stung is not the end of the world either. We all worry about stinging insects, wasps, and hornets and bees, and it's not pleasant. But after you've been stung a few times, you start realizing, well, it's not such a big deal, you know, I stubbed my toe, what am I going to do, run home and, you know, hide under the blankets? No, it's just, ouch, let's keep on working kind of thing. If you're stung, it's good to scrape off the stinger, scrape it off with your hive tool, because the stinger will have a little sac at the end that still continues to pump the venom into your skin. So, you know, if you can scrape that off with a fingernail or your hive tool to keep, don't pinch it, but rather scrape it off. That reduces the amount of venom going into your body. And, you know, last year, because I started giving visits to my hives, like I bought a it wasn't an EpiPen, but I bought a epinephrine in a syringe. You know, EpiPens are expensive, and I don't have any type of insurance coverage to buy that. So I have a friend who's a doctor. He prescribed some epinephrine in a syringe. And that's like $20 instead of $175. And you might want to keep that on hand. Your call. It's the first time I ever have some on hand at my place. And, you know, anaphylactic shock is quite a rare occurrence, frankly. But, you know, you never know. You might want to be safe like that. Usually it happens pretty quickly. And if you see someone who's been stung by a bee and they start having, you know, difficulties breathing, and if you don't have EpiPen, we'll take them to medical help as soon as possible to avoid anything, you know, any serious thing. Not many people die of bee stings in Canada every year. It's a very small number. Yet, you know, I'm sure many, many thousands of Canadians get stung by bees every year. So it gives you an idea of the risk involved here. Also, you'll be in your honey house, the place where you'll extract. You'll be, you'll have heavy equipment, moving parts, hot equipment. So we have to be aware of all that. Things are, so you want to have maybe gloves or good footwear. You might drop a heavy box on your foot. Keep things clean. Things get very sticky, and remove the clutter. The less there's clutter, the less likelihood you're going to trip on something or drop something or whatever. Any questions? Well, listen, we went through this lesson way too fast, right? It's only I got 5:46 here. I'm sorry about that, but it's a good time to ask any questions or, you know, have a more free discussion. On Tuesday, on the 12th, we'll be talking about installing bees. No, sorry, after you've installed your bees, what do we do? We'll be looking at the entire cycle of a whole year of a beekeeper, from the spring, after the winter's over, all the way to putting your bees to bed for the winter. So, which is an interesting thing. That's one of the more interesting aspects of beekeeping. Do we have any questions? Last time, a few of you stayed on board for a few minutes after the class is over, and it's a good time to just, you know, explore.
So for me, every location that I've thought about for where I want to put my bees, my neighbor uses my fields and whatnot, and every location I have, it's either close to where my family goes or where my neighbors use my fields and whatnot. He doesn't often use the tractor, but once in a while he'll drive past it. Is that going to be an issue for my bees?
How close does he get to the entrance? Would he get to the entrance? And if you're just 5 meters away from the entrance, it shouldn't be a problem at all, right? You know, if he just goes, what is your neighbor doing when he's driving? Is he cutting grass or cutting hay?
Yeah, he cuts hay with my field.
Yeah. So, you know, you just tell him there's bees there. You might do it on a day where I guess you don't cut hay when it's raining, right? So, yeah, just tell them there's bees there, and just be careful and don't get too close, maybe, and or maybe do it, you know, in the evening, just before, you know, after the bees are all inside the hive or something like this. Okay. I think they should be okay. Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Oh, also, can you have just one beehive, or is it recommended to have two?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Like anything, I don't know how many of you have kids out there, but you know, you have one kid and you say, all right, oh, all human beings are like this. All kids are like this guy. And you have another kid, you go, oh, it's very different, right? So same thing with beehives. They each have their bit of a personality. One might produce lots of honey, the other one not. One might be more aggressive and quicker to sting you than the other. So also it helps you understand that there are differences in the beehives, and it's not always because of you that a beehive, your colony is behaving in a certain way. It could be just the innate genetics and behavior of that hive. But also, when you have two hives, you're more versatile as a beekeeper. So let's say you have one hive and it started slow in the spring. You don't know why. It didn't accumulate much honey, and it needs a boost. So you can take frames of honey from your other hive, which may be stronger, and put it in the hive that is slow. Or maybe one of your hives, the queen, has died, is not laying very well, and the other hive is about to swarm. There's so many bees. You can take frames of eggs and larvae and put it in the weaker hive, and then you'll give the weak hive a boost. So having more than one hive helps in that regard. Yes, I think, you know, it could be, you might consider it a lot to take up in your first year of beekeeping, 2 hives, but if you can manage it, I think it's worth doing, starting with 2. Yes, good question. Thanks, John. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else out there?
So I have a question about the bee fertilization, which, if I remember right, these bees are haplodiploid scheme for reproduction. So, just a second.
We're hearing a lot of interference there. There's something wrong with your microphone, I think.
So the question that I have is about the drones for fertilizing your hives. From what I understand, there are not a lot of bees in my area.
Yeah.
And you know, what would you worry, or what would you do in terms of getting your, let's say, future queens to fertilize?
All right.
Like,
You want to start.
You want fertilizing themselves, right?
Yeah. So you want to start being more in charge of the genetics of your colonies. You want to make sure. Well, you know, yeah, if you're absolutely the only colony there, you have one colony, yeah, they're going to be inbreeding a lot, right? So, so what you can do is, first of all, if you start with one colony and a fertilized queen, well, she's good for 2 or 3 years, you know, you don't have to worry about it too much, but she might swarm off, and they'll start with another virgin queen who'll go and fertilize with drones of her own colony. I imagine, I'm no expert in this here, but I imagine it could be an issue. You can also buy fertilized queens, right? So you go online, again, I refer back to Facebook, say, who's got some queens for sale, right? And you get a lot of people telling you, oh, so-and-so, so-and-so. And some people, they're experts, you know, they're breeding for a certain type of thing, right? It could be the Italian breed or the whatever, the Russian breed, who knows what. And you can start working like that. You know, that's a higher level of beekeeping when you're starting to think about genetics